Hello, welcome back to part 2 of this KaboomJS tutorial. This time we're gonna look at having the barrier thing come down the screen. So if we look at the example one, so the aim of the game is to move out of the way of the barrier. So we're gonna look at how we can get something moving down the screen like this. So first thing, worst thing for me is actually having to draw the thing. So we'll come over to sprites, press the add button, and this time I'm going to actually change this value here, the width. So to make the game work, we just cancel and come back to the example. To make the game work, this has to be quite wide. So if I just stay in the middle, I'm going to get hit. So we actually need this to be a little bit wider. So I'm going to come over to here and add. And we know that the width of our screen is 200. So I want this to be, so let's just call this hazard, and the width. So it doesn't have to be quite half the screen. I'm going to say 80. And you still get this kind of square shape, but the actual width is wider when it goes into the game. So for obvious reasons, I'm going to keep this simple. Let's go to this rectangle. So I'm going to try and fill up most of the width. And then going to give some sort of legs here, and then I'm going to have this kind of yellow color and put some sort of hazard warning stripes on it. That will do. And let's come back to main. So there's our hazard. So let's just have a look at how that is in the game. So first thing, can do this shortcut to insert the code, and of course I could write this all out again, but I'm going to copy. So let's copy, come down here, call this hazard, and make sure I'm adding in the hazard sprite. Whoops, need to spell it right. And position, well, I don't want it to be at the bottom of the screen like the car. So let's say 50, and let's reload and have a look. Okay, that's not too bad. That seems okay. So we've now got our hazard added to the game, and remember from the first tutorial videos, this area is needed so that these two objects can collide, so they can detect each other, so they know when they're hitting each other. So that's what this area code is for here. So next step is to get this hazard moving down the screen. So to do that, I'm going to just come down here, and we're going to use this command on update, and again we've got our function part here. Whoops, with the arrow. It's actually an arrow function because we're using this arrow. So on update, and we don't have anything extra like this left or anything. We go straight into the function, and on update will happen throughout the whole game. So it constantly updates. So each frame, each kind of tick of the game, as the game goes on, this is going to happen in a loop. So on update, what do we want to happen? Well, we want this to move down the screen. So we've already seen how we can move an object with car.move because we're moving the car. But this time we are moving the hazard. So I'm going to do hazard.move. and I don't want to move it left and right, so my X movement is 0. I want it to move down the screen, so that's positive, and let's say at 150. So let's reload and have a look at it moving down the screen, and reload again. So it's moving down the screen, and at the moment it is just passing over the car. So even though we have this area here, they know they're colliding, but they don't know what to do when they collide. So a bit later on, we're going to have to make some code that says if the car hits the hazard, what's going to happen. So it will be, game over. But before we get there, we need to do a bit more with this hazard. So at the moment, it's moving down the screen, and it's leaving, and it's not coming back. We actually want it to leave the screen, and then reset up to the top. Leave and reset up to the top. We are not making a new hazard every time. We are recycling the old one. And so what we want to do is we want to know, has it left the bottom of the screen? Has it gone off the screen? If it has, then we are going to reset it up to the top of the screen. So how can I do that? Well, because we want to know if something has happened, we can use an if, and we want to know about the hazard position, and we don't really care about the X position. It's not moving X, it's not moving left or right. You want to know about the Y position. So if the Y position is off the bottom of the screen, so if it's more than the height of this screen, and we know the height of the screen because we set that up here, that's 320. So if it's more than 320, so if it's moved off the screen, what do we want to happen? Well, for now, we could just tell it to go back up to the top of the screen. So we can say the hazard position and the Y position is now going to equal, well, what's the top of the screen? We could say 0. So let's have a look at that. Control S. So there it is, it's moved off the bottom, and then it appears straight away at the top. So it's going round and round. So on update, that means it's happening all the time throughout the game. The hazard is going to move at this speed on the Y, 150, down. And if the hazard's Y position is more than 320, and we know this is 320 because we set the height of the game, the beginning. If it's more than 320, then the hazard Y position is going to go back to 0. And that's why we're getting this effect. So, okay, we've got something happening, but that's not quite how we want it to happen in the game. Because if you remember, if I go back to the sample game here, if you remember, it's actually going from, sometimes it's on the right hand side, sometimes it's on the left hand side. So it's randomly choosing whether or not it's going to be on the right hand side or the left hand side. Because if it always comes in the same position, then we can easily just stay out of the way. So that's the next thing we need to do. So let's have a look at how we can make this hazard randomly move from the left side to the right hand side. So I do want this to happen once it's left the bottom of the screen, as well as setting the Y position to 0 to come up to the top. I want to set the X position to either the left hand side or the right hand side. So I could put all that code into here, but I'm going to take it out of here into another function. And the reason for that is it's good coding practice to not let any one part, like one function, get too massive. So this onUpdate is a function, and if this were going to be a really big game and I had lots of things happening, adding all that code into this one function would mean it gets really long and would be hard to read and hard to make changes to your code later. So I'm going to make a new function. I'm going to call it reset hazard, and then that's how we set up a function with these round brackets and the curly brackets. And the first thing I want to do is to take this, so I'm going to cut Control X and put that up into here, and down here I'm going to call this function. So I write the function name reset hazard with the brackets, and now we shouldn't see any change because it gets to here, calls this function, and the only thing here is this setting the Y position to 0. So I'm going to Control S, and it still looks like it's doing the same thing. But to prove that something has changed, if I comment out the function call, so this is a comment, so this code will not run, this will be ignored, and I Control S. This time when it reaches the bottom, it's not coming up to the top because this function is not being called. So let's put that back in. Control S, make sure it's working. So it reaches the bottom and it goes up to the top. So the first thing I want to deal with is the fact that this hazard is coming down the center of the screen, and I never want it to come down the center. I only want it to come to the left or to the right. So if I look at where my hazard is first made, the X position is 80. I don't want it to be 80, I'm going to change it to 35. So this might be different depending on how you've drawn your hazard. So I think 35 is good for the left hand side, and we're going to look at the right hand side in a moment. So let's come into our reset hazard. So the first thing I want to do now is decide if it's going to be left or right, and I want this to be randomly generated. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to use a random number to decide whether I'm on the left or the right. So I'm going to set up this variable called side, and I'm going to use this code here, rand_i, and I'm going to choose a number 0 to 2. And if we look here in the example, rand_i 03 will give either 0, 1 or 2. It doesn't include the 3. And I want either 0 or 1. So it doesn't include that 2. So 0 means we're going to the left, and 1 means we're going to the right. So I know it's confusing that we have 0 and 2, but it doesn't include the 2. It's 0 and 1. And how can we know that? Well, we can look here. It tells you, or one thing this would be a good time to let you know about is the actual KaboomJS website. So this is KaboomJS.com, and on here you can find just about everything you probably want to know about Kaboom. And if I start searching and I'm looking for something to do with random, then down here we can see we've got this rand_i, and again it tells you we'll give either 0, 1 or 2, so it's not including that 3. So we come back to the game, so this 0 and 2, so I want to know whether I've got a 0 or a 1. Remember, it doesn't include the 2. it's either 0 or 1. So if this side is equal to 0, then, so I'm just going to put a note, say that we're going to the left. So if it's not 0, so else, so if it's 0, go to the left, else, otherwise, we go to the right. So what do I need here to make it go left or right? Well, I need an X position. So right up at the top here, I'm going to set this up. So I'm going to say let X equal 35. And this is just like our X position up here. So it starts off at 35. And if I get 0, then I'm going to keep it at 35. But if I get not 0 or 1, then I want this hazard to be on the right hand side and perhaps something around 110. So first I need to set up the variable X so it knows what it is. Then I pick my random side between 0 or 1. If I get a 0, I'm keeping this at 35, else I'm going to 110. And then down here, we always want the Y position to be 0, that means at the top of the screen, but the X position, the hazard.pos.x, is going to be equal to this X value, which will be either 35 or 110. So let's Control S and let's see what we get. So now you can see that this hazard is sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right. It doesn't mean it goes left, right. It's like tossing a coin. You don't always get heads, tails, You might get heads, then tails, then heads, then tails. So it's random, but that doesn't mean that it takes it in turns to go left, right. So if we look at here, sometimes we're getting more on the left, now it's on the right, but you still don't know whether or not it's going to actually appear on the left or on the right. So now it's looking more like the game. And one more thing that I want to do is that every time the hazard resets, I'm also going to move the car back to the center of the screen. Because I found if it was on the right, say it's on the left there and I move over here, and then it's still on the left, I don't have to move again until it moves. And if we get several in a row on one side, then the game is more boring because I only ever have to move if the hazard moves. But if the car is reset to the center, then I have to move every single time. So that's going to be quite simple to do. Along with resetting the hazard position, I'm going to reset my car X position, and somewhere near the center of the screen, well, we know that the screen is 200 wide, so the center of the screen is going to be 100. Now, depending on how you've drawn your car, this may or may not work out exactly. So yeah, you see so I'm not moving that. The car is being reset, and it's not quite in the center from the way we've drawn it. This might be changing a bit later, but for now, let's have this as 80. And so each time that hazard comes down, so if I'm over here, you see it's jumping back to the center. So that means that I have to still move out the way. I can't just stay on one side to avoid it. So that may seem odd, but it actually makes the game a bit more playable, a bit more challenging. Okay, so now we're getting all the main elements of the game. We still don't have the collisions or the scores, so that's what we'll look at in the next video.